I believe many of you don't really understand what Animal Farm is about because you guys focus on how George Orwell critiqued communism and socialism, but actually this book is really more as a warning on how human greed, ego, and desire for power actually corrupts even the most well-intentioned of systems. And this is not something that I see anywhere in the internet because you guys have completely missed the point of this book. Hello, my gorgeous viewers and readers. I hope your weekend was filled with warm shepherd's pies, hot reads, and animal revolutions that end up being even more corrupt than the ones they had before. Today, we are diving deep into one of the books that radicalized me as a teenager, the kind of book that made me think, oh my god, this is all rigged, everything's a lie, we are doomed. And this book is Animal Farm by George Orwell. But what pains me the most is the fact that all the conversations that we have about Animal Farm only scratch the surface. We always see how George Orwell hated communism, or the kind of conversations that talk about how communism was bad, or how George Orwell critiqued the USSR and obviously Stalin. But actually, this book talks about way more than that. We are not talking about how a system fails, but how humanity is always failing. Every single time. Let's talk about it. Let's break down all the major themes that everyone seems to understand but never peek into the conversation. And the one first major topic that I want to talk about is how animalism actually represents Marxism or true communism. This is, for me, the most important topic of all, because we see how Old Major, who is the oldest boar of the farm, he is the one that sparks the conversation and actually brings light into the revolution, right? He's the one that starts it all. He is the one that mentions animalism, but also at the same time, he is the one that leads the revolution, especially when he dies, because at the end of the day, he is the one that is used as a martyr, right? He has, like, I would say Old Major has this sort of blend between Marx and also Lenin, as he was the professor and he was the one that actually created all this theory in order for others to put it in practice, right? He has this idea, or like he is this idea of the perfect society and this utopia. But the only thing that we forget is the fact that as Marx and Lenin, Old Major has forgotten something very key, and is the fact that even though this utopia sounds perfect in idea, actually when you put it in practice, we forget human nature, which is greed, envy, jealousy, and also desire for control and power, which makes us corrupted. And this appears to be very clear to me when we see the character Snowball. He is like those 18-year-olds who read Lenin or who read Marx and think that that is the way society has to be like, that we have to live in this utopia, in this society, right? So therefore, once they are 18, they go into politics, or they just get into these socialist, anarchist, or communist social parties or political parties, and then they find that the reality is not like it was supposed to be, or like the idea that they had, right? Snowball is the exact same. He is this young boar or this young pig who believes in these ideals, believes in animalism, right? And thinks that everything that he will do or everything that he can do will be for the better good. And this is exactly why he loses, right? Because his ideals are nothing more than ideals. Because at the end of the day, even though these ideals or these utopia sounds great on paper, actually that is not how society works. Because at the end of the day, we as humanity or we as humans are imperfect, and we have this desire to be corrupted. Because Snowball wants equality, he wants education, he wants a better future for everyone else, right? And this is exactly why he loses, because he doesn't realize that there are other people, or there are people that even though they are initially have these ideals, actually what they are is opportunists. They just go for the better good for them, for themselves, right? And I would say Snowball is is like Trotsky, right? He has this idea of what society should look like, and he truly believes that this is something that he can do, or like this is a change that he can make possible. But actually, in reality, that is not what happens. That is not something that we as a community or we as a society can even get to. And this thought was actually set in stone once I met Napoleon as a character, because he is the perfect example of how all these people that have these ideas of revolution or want to rebel against the new regime or like the old regime actually become just as bad or even worse than the old regime, right? Because he at first truly believes in animalism, right? He believes that this is something that they have to do because they have to change and they have to, just basically change history, right? And this is why at the start he is just as good as Snowball, right? Because they are both brothers fighting hand by hand, right? Like they are together. But then once Napoleon gets into power with Snowball, he actually realizes that what is actually powerful about revolutions is not the fact that they are changing history or they are changing the world to make it a better place for everyone else. No, he actually realizes that this change or this revolution means that he has power, that he has control. And that is what actually makes him change. That's what makes him the dictator that he is. Napoleon quickly realizes that he can recreate the same authoritarian system that he was under, but putting himself at the top. And like Stalin, he actually becomes obsessed with control, with surveillance, with controlling all the goods, but also with rewriting history and also making sure that he can use the fear that the animals have, right? Sounds familiar? It does to me. The second major theme of this book is actually the machinery of dictatorship, because I believe Orwell wasn't just critiquing the USSR regime, or he wasn't just critiquing Stalin. He was actually critiquing all the other regimes that have existed in history and the ones that we have in the present right now. The best example that I have in the book is the use of labor and exploitation, right? Because if we look into all the animals that are in the farm, we see the way Napoleon controls them, right? So for example, if we look into the horses, we see how they are the working class. They are the ones that build the farm from the ground, right? Then we have the hens and cows, who are actually the reproductive labor and also the production labor, right? They are the ones that feed everyone else. The sheep, for example, are propaganda consumers because they are the ones that just like repeat everything that Napoleon says. And then the dogs are obviously the military and the police force, and then the pigs are the ruling elite, right? That is exactly how society works right now, because we have like humans, or we have people within the working class that are actually catering in some way or another to the ruling elite. And obviously, another technique that Napoleon uses is that he will use scarcity mindset, right? This is something that happens very often in society, even in capitalism, for example, and is the fact that we see how during economic recessions or even during crises and also wars, we see that there is a huge scarcity mindset, right? We see how there is hunger, there is poverty, there is this desire or like this sense of crisis everywhere we go, right? This is happening right now, even after the pandemic, right? We see how everyone is struggling, everyone is hungry, no one has a home, no one can afford a home. So therefore, you don't actually think or want to think about revolution. What you actually want to think about, or what you are actually thinking of, is how to be fed, how to survive. And that is how we control the minds, right? That is how we make sure that people stay quiet. Because if you're hungry, you're not thinking about rebelling. Because if you keep the workers desperate, you make them manageable, right? Because we see this in modern economies, for example, that we have chronic poverty, but also we see it in like millionaire-led corporations who actually refuse to pay their employees fairly, but also governments that refuse to raise minimum wages because they think we're getting paid too much already, or entire nations where scarcity is actually the reality of the vast majority of the population, right? Because at the end of the day, this is not just one individual in the ruling elite, right? It's an entire system that is actually feeding the cycle. And this is the part that gets me heated, right? Because Animal Farm is not just a critique of the USSR. It's actually a critique of any human system that we have had in society, but also that we have had in history. Because at the end of the day, the main problem that we have here, or that we see in Animal Farm, is not that there is just one individual that actually wants this dictatorship in order to make himself or to make themselves the ruler and dictator of everything, right? It's actually how any human in history, or who, like anyone who actually tried to fight for a revolution or to make things better, was actually slowly or very quickly corrupted by power or by desire of control. Like, we have so many examples in this society or in history that actually show the same exact thing. Because Orwell was not just saying communism bad, he was actually saying humans ruin everything. Because even the best ideologies will fail if someone has a desire for power and desire for control, and also if leaders are not being held accountable, but also if history is rewritten, or if we forget to educate people, and also us as people or as the middle class, we don't actually hold our leaders accountable, but also make sure that they are in line. This is like a work for everyone, right? It's not just something that the leaders have to do, but us as people, we have to be informed, and we also have to hold all these leaders accountable. If you don't think this is true, just look at the government today, or just look at any regime from any culture or from any point in history. The cycle will always repeat, right? We always have hope, right? We always see people like desiring something more, right? Then we see revolution, then leadership, then we see greed, we see corruption, oppression, and then collapse, right? We always see the same cycle. We see how people have the best ideas, but then once they put them in practice, they slowly turn sour. And this is something that has happened everywhere in the world, and it just keeps happening, even with capitalism, for example. Like, tell me this doesn't sound like modern life, right? Because we see billionaires hoarding wealth, even though there are people starving in the streets. Or how corporations refuse to pay living wages, even though they are evading taxes so they can gain more money. Or how governments are always refusing to actually fight for people's rights, because what they are doing is actually supporting the elite, right? Or how, for example, the government also allows homelessness, whilst there are hundreds of luxury flats that are or that remain empty, because we have landlords that are hoarding them in order to rent them at exorbitant prices. Like, this is something that happens everywhere, that happens with capitalism, right? And I don't think this is a functioning system. Even though here we are critiquing socialism and communism, we also need to take into account that I find it very strange that modern capitalism is terrifyingly similar to what we see in Animal Farm. Like, for example, one of the most important quotes we have in the book is, some animals are more equal than others, right? Does doesn't this sound like modern life right now? Because we see this with the job market. Not all candidates are equal. We see this with healthcare. We see this with immigration, or with help, or with support. We see this everywhere, right? That we are not equal in the slightest, right? And this is because of all these social hierarchies. So at the end of the day, I will say that Orwell is not actually only critiquing socialism and communism. What he's actually doing is critiquing all these systems, all these social systems that are actually focused on social hierarchy, because social hierarchy is actually the thing that makes us corrupt. And last, I would say the biggest topic that I see in the book is about the dangers of being apolitical, right? I would say Orwell was terrified of apathy, right? Because at the end of the day, apathy is the only thing that keeps the system moving, right? That keeps the oppression as it is. And this is the best example that we have on this is with Benjamin the donkey, right? Like, this character, he sees everything, he knows everything, he just doesn't care, he just doesn't want to act, because at the end of the day, he just doesn't want to be involved. And this is something that we see in society as well. We see people not voting, we see people not understanding or not having a single thought about politicians or about politics in general, because at the end of the day, that doesn't really affect them. They are just living life, right? We shouldn't be apolitical. We should be very aware of what is happening in society or what is going on politically around us, in order to make sure that not only we make the right decisions when choosing politicians, but also at the same time that we keep people accountable. As a quick conclusion, Animal Farm is not just a book about how communism or socialism failed. It's a book about how humans keep failing repeatedly over and over again. It warns us that revolutions or political systems will become corrupt if left unchecked, right? That is why we have to keep informed, we have to be educated, but also at the same time that we keep people in check, right? That we make sure that the people at the top are the ones that are fighting for the better good, right? This is why Animal Farm is so important as a book. And also, it's not a book about why communism failed, but it's a book about why humanity keeps repeating history. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you like this video, and I hope that you give Animal Farm a chance if you haven't read it yet. And if you have, please let me know in the comments what you think about the book, or also what you think about the whole video. Let me know your opinion. I would love to discuss, obviously, nicely in the comments. But also, you can follow me on my social media and we can discuss that, or you can just watch my regular content that I post every day. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you soon. Bye, guys.